This week on Brian Ross Investigates, while an angry and glum president ponders his future.
If you count the illegal votes, they can try to steal the election from us.
Prosecutors are working on criminal cases that could put Donald Trump and his family and his company in serious jeopardy. We're joined by Pulitzer Prize winning journalist and author David Cay Johnston.
Donald Trump could somehow end up in prison. Is that realistic?
It's certainly realistic that he will end up convicted of crimes.
Plus, inside the growing white nationalist movement in this country. The photojournalist who was there for some of America's ugliest moments in recent history tells us what he saw and what he sees next.
I would love to stop, but I can't possibly, knowing that these groups are still out there.
And this week's winners and losers in the media from the editors of Mediaite, calling the election.
CNN projects Joseph R. Biden Jr. is elected the 46th president of the United States.
Repeated false claims.
I think that it is a corrupt, stolen election.
From the Law&Crime Trial Network, this is Brian Ross Investigates.
Good evening, and thanks for joining us. And welcome to our viewers on Facebook Live. I'm Brian Ross, joined as always tonight by Rhonda Schwartz, my colleague at Law&Crime. And Rhonda, we begin with the drama in Washington as President Trump continues to maintain the election was stolen from him and he refuses to concede to Joseph Biden. No one likes to be a loser, but there's something else at play here for Donald Trump, the fact that he knows he, his family, and his company are under serious criminal investigation, Rhonda.
That's right. As president, Donald Trump has enjoyed immunity from prosecution. It's Justice Department policy that you cannot indict a sitting president. But all that changes on January 20th when President Trump becomes Citizen Trump, Brian.
To learn more about this, we're now joined by David Cay Johnston, the Pulitzer Prize winning investigative reporter, author of 4 books, 2 of them on Trump, and co-founder of DC Report. David, thank you so much for joining us. We're talking about the prospect that Donald Trump could somehow end up in prison. Is that realistic?
It's certainly realistic that he will end up convicted of crimes. By the time he would get to sentencing, I expect, like General Pinochet of Chile, he would show up in court in a wheelchair and pleading that he's a sick old man to get house arrest.
What are the most significant investigations? Which one do you think has the most heft?
Well, the current one that's in the front is the New York City or New York County grand jury. They have been looking for some time into bank, insurance, and tax fraud. And all they're lacking are the records of his accounting firm, which Trump has now twice been to the Supreme Court trying to stop. They will eventually get those records, and I expect he'll be indicted. Second, the New York State Attorney General has a civil investigation underway, but that could morph into a racketeering charge against Trump and the Trump Organization. And if that were to happen, upon indictment, prosecutors could seize his assets like Mar-a-Lago and Trump Tower and his golf courses as the fruit of a criminal enterprise.
He faces real trouble. A question for you, David, from Rhonda Schwartz. Rhonda?
David, if these prosecutions go forward, won't it just seem like politically motivated revenge and undercut the validity of all this?
Well, it certainly will play that way with some people, but here's the important thing about the grand jury investigation in Manhattan. It's for things Trump did before he took office, going back to 2011. And it's not the federal government doing it, it's the state government. And he's all the way along fought disclosure of documents the grand jury should have gotten a long time ago. So yes, I'm sure Donald will complain this is some improper vengeance, just like he won't acknowledge that he's lost the election. But it's a garden variety fraud investigation covering many years of conduct. And let's keep in mind that story I broke 4 years ago, Donald has already been tried twice in the past for civil tax fraud. He lost both of those cases, and his own witness revealed at that hearing that he is a forger. He forged his own tax return and put his tax lawyer's name on it. in order to wrongfully claim $600,000 in tax losses.
Let me follow up on that, David. Also, the U.S. Attorney's Office in the Southern District of Manhattan in New York, part of the federal Justice Department, has a potential case against him. Would that seem like a political revenge under a Biden administration?
Yeah, that's the one that is the easiest to prove and yet the most problematic politically. Mclaughlin went to prison and is still under house arrest for crimes that he did at the direction of individual one, who has since been identified as Donald Trump. So if Mclaughlin is properly a felon and in prison, then Donald Trump should be prosecuted. But because it's the federal government, that is the one charge that he can scream loudest about is revenge by the Democrats or Biden or whomever it is he wants to accuse, even though it's the easiest to prove. It's a slam dunk.
Let me ask you about the prospect of a pardon, pardons he might grant, and perhaps pardon himself, even though that wouldn't keep him clear from the state charges. But what about that notion? We expect a number of pardons to come in the next 2.5 months, and could he pardon himself?
Well, he will certainly issue a lot of pardons, particularly to his daughter Ivanka and her husband Jared Kushner, who faces some real serious problems otherwise. I think the U.S. Supreme Court ruling on access to his accounting records in July, in which Chief Justice Roberts wrote that no man is above the law, makes it very clear he cannot pardon himself, and the Supreme Court will not uphold such a pardon. On the other hand, he could potentially resign as president, let's say on the morning of January 20th. Mike Pence would be sworn in as president. Pence could then pardon him. There are two problems with that approach. One is the Supreme Court might decide that that's a sham and not have it stand. They might also take the view that the president has the power to do this. But Mike Pence would be subject to prosecution for bribery because conducting an official act in return for anything of value is a crime. Well, being president of the United States, even if it's for 1 hour, is something of value. And were Mike Pence to do that, I think we would all be shocked if he was not prosecuted.
Let me ask you just to follow up there for our viewers. A pardon can be granted, for instance, for his children in advance of any charges. Doesn't have to be a pending charge for there to be a pardon.
Well, that's an untested idea, but Gerald Ford gave a pardon to Richard Nixon for all crimes he may have committed. And of course, Richard Nixon's tax lawyer went to prison over his fraudulent tax returns. I think a blanket pardon would probably be upheld by the Supreme Court. But remember this, under a 1925 U.S. Supreme Court decision called Burdick, the acceptance of a pardon, which is optional, you can reject a pardon as Burdick did on ethical grounds, means that you are confessing that you have committed offenses against the United States. So if you accept a pardon, everybody else can reasonably call you for the rest of your life a criminal.
Fascinating insight. So bottom line here, he faces a world of hurt.
Oh, his life is going to be absolutely miserable once he loses the protections and privileges of being president, because in addition to this, he's got more than 24 women pressing sexual assault and rape civil cases against him. And the most troubling one of those for him is the writer E. Jean Carroll, who was a writer at Saturday Night Live at one time, who kept the clothes she was wearing when she says Donald raped her, and she has been seeking his DNA. If she gets his DNA and it matches up, just as with Bill Clinton and Monica Lewinsky's blue dress, he's in a world of hurt.
Another dress. David Cay Johnston, once again, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
Coming up next, a rare inside look at the growing white nationalist movement in this country, an ugly legacy of the Trump era. You're watching Brian Ross Investigates on the Law and Crime Trial Network. Well, so far, fears of violence after the election have not come to be. Even so, the FBI continues to take a close look at a number of groups that all too often have threatened to take some kind of action.
An ugly, undeniable legacy of the presidency of Donald Trump. The growth of extremist groups like this one, marching to the Lincoln Memorial in Washington, D.C., all documented by photojournalist Zach Roberts.
It's a far-right white nationalist group called Patriot Front. And if you notice in some of the flags and that sort of thing in the photos and the video, they actually have a fasces, which is an old Roman, kind of age-old symbol of, empire and that sort of thing. And they crossed the bridge saying, reclaim America, and marched right through, right up the mall, right up to the Capitol building.
And what is their reaction to having you there, somebody who's not part of the group? How did you fit in, or did you fit in?
One of the things that I do when I cover rallies is that I get people's faces. I try to document who they are to try to find out more about these groups.
You've done amazing work sort of getting inside these groups, covering them so well. Let's talk about what you saw in Charlottesville, that famed march.
They lit up the torches and moved through all of those buildings that have such a, some of them are designed by Thomas Jefferson. And they were marching through that, yelling, Jews will not replace us, they will not replace us, and, all in unison. And it was one of the more terrifying moments of my life. I think that the night in Charlottesville, the Tiki Torch March, shook me more than everything.
You had some very bad people in that group, but you also had people that were very fine people on both sides.
Then you have Donald Trump saying that, there are good people on both sides. I didn't meet any good people on one side. These people were not for what America stands for.
The next day, Roberts was there when some of them attacked a 21-year-old teaching assistant by the name of DeAndre Harris.
They literally they pushed him into the parking arm of the garage, and then one of them picked up that parking arm and started beating him brutally with it. I actually showed photos of that to a trooper that was right outside there while they were still there. The people who had attacked him, several of them were still there. And I said, this just happened. And the police officer, the trooper, just shrugged his shoulders and said, what are you going to do?
And those photos became important evidence.
Yes. Yeah, thankfully, those photos, I published them. Sean King and a whole bunch of other activists basically went on the web and said, okay, we're going to find these guys. And they found them. And thankfully, 4 people were tried and convicted. And they are now, at least I think, about 5 to 10 years in prison. This was one of my first times that I realized, when I became a photojournalist, I thought, okay, I'm going to cover this sort of thing overseas. I'm going to cover, I grew up watching you, watching Yugoslavia, watching, all these wars, and I'm like, okay, I'm going to go cover that. I'll have to wear a bulletproof vest and a helmet and all this gear. Right now in my car, I carry everywhere I go. I have a ballistic helmet, I have a bulletproof vest, and I have 2 different types of gas masks.
Roberts was in Philadelphia last week covering election protests when authorities said they broke up a plot to attack the vote-counting headquarters.
Philadelphia police arrest 61-year-old Antonio LaMotta, one of 2 Virginia men caught outside the Pennsylvania Convention Center, armed with handguns.
So how did the authorities get on to this plot?
I literally just got off the phone before I talked to you with my contacts about this. With QAnon, I never like to assume mental health issues, but it is a cult that is ready to die at any given moment for it. The people that accelerate to that point that they're willing to get into a car, drive up to a different across states, with arms, guns in their car, and go. That is a moment, because inevitably they will get confronted by police, and that's when something will happen.
Let me ask you this: with former Vice President Biden now likely the president-elect, what do you think is going to happen in the next 3 months before the inauguration?
That is the big if that almost every conversation that I have with people who cover this, my friends and colleagues and my sources, that we're constantly asking. And, if Donald Trump comes out and continually beats the drum that it was stolen from him, that this isn't right or whatever, that's when I think that we'll have a lot more of these this QAnon incident that happened, almost happened, at least at the convention center.
And you're going to continue to cover it, even with the threats and the risk that you run.
Absolutely. Unfortunately, this has become, I would love to stop, but I can't possibly, knowing that these groups are still out there, and that they're not going to go away. Even if Joe Biden wins and nothing happens over the 3 months, the Proud Boys, Patriot Front, all these groups are still going to be out there, and you're going to see them on a local level and in different ways, still organizing, and they're not going to go away in either one.
Zach Roberts, thank you so much for joining us, and a salute to your bravery and your skill as a photojournalist.
Thank you so much.
Coming up next, this week's winners and losers in the media, taking stock 1 week after the election. You're watching Brian Ross Investigates on the Law and Crime Trial Network. Time now for this week's winners and losers in the media, as chosen by the editors of Mediaite. And we're joined, as always, by Aidan Mclaughlin, who's the editor-in-chief of Mediaite, which, like the Law and Crime Trial Network, is part of the Dan Abrams media empire. Aidan, thanks for being here this week. In the midst of all the election news, you chose your first winner as the CEO of the Pfizer drug company, with some very welcome news for everyone.
It is a great day for science. It is a great day for humanity when you realize that your vaccine has a 90% effectiveness. That's overwhelming. You understand that the hopes of billions of people and millions and businesses and hundreds of governments that were felt on our shoulders, now we can credibly tell them, I think we can see light at the end of the tunnel.
Very welcome news, Aidan. Everyone was saluting that, including Wall Street.
Yeah, so that's right. You make a good point there. It was a really crazy week in news. I think everyone was focused on the election until we had this announcement from Pfizer on Monday that they had a breakthrough in the phase 3 coronavirus trials and had a vaccine that's showing 90% efficacy, which is a really astonishing development. The coronavirus pandemic is the biggest story of the year. And the fact that Pfizer has made this breakthrough is really welcome news. And now you have Dr. Anthony Fauci saying that we really could have a vaccine being distributed to people by the end of the year. So the CEO of Pfizer appeared on Squawk Box, the CNBC show, and did a really lengthy interview. It lasted about 30 minutes, and it was fascinating. He answered all their questions, and it revealed a lot about where the state of the vaccine developments are right now. He did a later interview on CNN, but we really thought the CNBC one was the most fascinating, the most informative. So yeah, that made for a good winner this week.
Absolutely. And for loser, back to Fox News, Brian Kilmeade, fanning the flames of conspiracy theories. Let's take a look at that.
He wants a recount in some of them. He's probably going to get it in Wisconsin, probably going to get it in Georgia. He also has a situation where he's got legal teams fanned out in all these states. For example, Sidney Powell comes out and said yesterday there were 450,000 ballots found with only Biden's name on it. That bothers the president, I'm sure. There's a software called Hammer and Scorecard used to flip votes from Trump to Biden. Is that indeed true? Don't you think if you're the president of the United States, you'd like to find out?
All that's missing there is some proof or evidence, Aidan.
Yep. Yeah. So, we've seen a truly shocking amount of conspiracy theories and false claims regarding election fraud get floated on social media and make their way up to Fox News in the last few days. Now, to Fox News' credit, most of their anchors and reporters have done a good job of dispelling unproven rumors about the election, which the network says that Joe Biden has won. The opinion hosts are a different story. Fox and Friends co-host Brian Kilmeade, who we saw just there, on Monday, he gave airtime to this allegation from pro-Trump lawyers that a computer program named Hammer and Scorecard were used to flip votes from Trump to Biden. Now, that conspiracy theory was debunked. We know it's not true. And I think Brian Kilmeade will maintain that he was just asking a question there. He was just floating an allegation to his audience. He wasn't saying whether it was true or not. But I think news people have a higher burden when they make an allegation like that. I can't just go on Fox and Friends and say, Steve Doocy might be a lizard person. I'm just asking questions. You actually have to have some evidence to prove these things, particularly if you're in the news business. Brian Kilmeade is just one of the Fox News opinion hosts who have been getting behind President Donald Trump's claims that the election was stolen from him. They've done it to varying degrees, but it's certainly not good conduct for news people who should be looking at this and saying, before they make a conclusion, where's the evidence? Or before they even ask questions about something that is so clearly a conspiracy theory that it's already been debunked.
And overall, Aidan, we have 1 minute left here. How do you judge the overall performance of the media during this election week and counting the votes?
I think the media has done a really good job. I think there was a huge burden on the media in the week running up to the election. You saw all these hosts saying, we have to be really patient and cautious, which is not something that cable news is known for. We have to remind our audience that the election could take days, could take a week, that we're not going to know the results on election night. And I think a lot of their audience were prepared for that. And the cable news networks in particular did a good job of having patience in making any sort of declaration. Now, I think there's also a weird holding pattern where the media has declared Joe Biden the projected winner of the election, and President Trump and a lot of his party is refusing to acknowledge that. It's going to be wild to see how that develops, because there's going to be an increasing schism between a major political party in America and the media.
Absolutely. I know you'll be watching it closely. So thanks again, Aidan, for being here tonight. And thanks to all of you for watching. And we'll see you next week. And finally, thanks to the great team at Law and Crime for getting us on the air and getting us off the air without a hitch.